So I want to start with a couple thank yous. Bailey, most of you know, has been sick for a while, and so we wanted to say thank you to all of you who've been praying for, and for those of you who have helped out with foodstuffs and everything else. I also want to thank you in advance. Because we are covering both chapters 10 and 11 today in Ecclesiastes. So we're going to finish up our lessons in Ecclesiastes today. So I appreciate the grace I'm sure all of you will show me for extending today's services. It was a joke, guys. It's not going to be that long. Huh? Yeah, something. They're just silently going to accept that. It's all right. We'll be here all day. So Ecclesiastes so far, as we said, we're going to wrap up here, and we're kind of coming to a head of the author's whole point throughout this whole book, and it takes him 12 chapters to get there, but we start off today in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, and he's arguing for the sake of wisdom. And so, verse 1, it talks about dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. So, primarily what the author is going to be concerned about in chapters 10 and 11 is the idea of both seeking wisdom and applying wisdom to our choices. And so that verse 1, that idea of a dead fly ruining a perfumer's scent, is this idea of it doesn't take much to ruin our reputation. That's what he's talking about here. We can pursue our whole lives trying to build for ourselves this reputation of being somebody of wisdom or being an intelligent person, somebody that people can trust, somebody people can view as reliable, but it only takes one mistake for that to be ruined. So we have to safeguard ourselves against this. It doesn't matter how much good intentions you have. When it comes to people, it only takes one mistake to ruin everything we work for. Now, he goes on to talk about the idea that a fool is a fool is a fool. It doesn't matter where you put a fool, he's still a fool. Right? You could put him on the right path, he's still a fool. He's still going to make the wrong choices, still going to walk on the wrong side of the road. Still going to be a fool. And the heart of wisdom is going to make us inclined to correct behavior. It doesn't mean we're going to make correct decisions all the time, but it means it's going to help us. It's going to help steer us in that direction. It's going to make that decision more desirable to us. And in verse 4, and this is in my opinion, a pretty important lesson that I think we stop taking to heart as much when we stop viewing people as having authority over us. But for the men that were here yesterday, I hope that this resonates with you especially. It says, if the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. And we talked yesterday in our men's Bible study about the idea of humility, making ourselves second to everyone else. So, who's the ruler? If we are, in fact, putting ourselves as less than everyone else, if we're making ourselves a servant to everyone, who has authority over us? Doesn't everybody? If my purpose in this life is to be less than, to serve others, then doesn't that make them ahead of me? So if somebody's angry with me, how do I respond to that? And we discussed in our men's group yesterday about how, I should say I said, the good way to decide or to gauge your own humility is to decide how frequently you're offended. Because the more offended you are, chances are the more prideful you are. Because that's what being offended is. It's saying, I deserve. But in the face of other people's anger, staying calm can oftentimes cover any wrongdoings that we've even committed or that they think that we've committed. Now, what's the author's point? Because it seems in 4 verses that he's bounced around to 4 different topics. But what he's trying to paint for us is an image of what a wise man looks like. And he continues this picture. I'm not going to read every verse like I have in the past. Hopefully, I want to encourage you guys to be hopefully studying some of this on your own. So I'm going to kind of just go overviews of the whole chapter here. But the rest of this verse, or the rest of this chapter, is him painting this image of what a wise man looks like versus what a fool looks like. It's the whole chapter. And so he gives a lot of these little individual platitudes. A wise man does this, a fool does this. Almost like Proverbs. And his point in all of this is to move into chapters 11. And in chapter 11, he talks about how pointless and how, or in his words, how vain this life is. It's all so very temporary. Verse 1, he says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, then the place where the tree falls, there it will lie." And so, the image of casting our bread onto the water and finding it there many days after, the image of sharing a portion of what we have to several different people, he's telling us we don't know how long this is going to last. You know, like bread on the water, we might be here for a little while yet. Knowing that we're doomed, we might still be here for a little while. Right? We know if I throw a piece of bread on some water, eventually that bread's going to sink, right? We all understand physics well enough to know. Like the bread's going to get soaked, it's going to sink, right? But we don't know when. And it might be a few more days, right? Or the idea of sharing what we have with other people. We say, you might die tomorrow. We don't know. So how does this play into the last chapter? Well, he's telling us if we don't know how long we're going to be here, then it makes it infinitely more important that we're living our life meaningfully. What he's telling us is throughout 11 chapters now, 11 chapters, the only meaningful way of living life is living a life of wisdom. And that's what that whole chapter 10 is talking about. This is how we do that. This is how we live a life worth living. Verses 7 through 10 reads, "And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to..." Sorry, I skipped over into the next chapter already. I'm sorry. "Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you to judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity." And so here again, the author is telling us how absolutely fleeting life is. It's all so temporary, right? And he says it's okay for us to take pleasures in life, but we can't forget that it is going to end. That there is going to be a time when that life no longer exists. And it can be a struggle working through Ecclesiastes. As you guys have watched me for months now trying to work through this book, it can be really hard to stay positive reading this book because for 11 chapters it feels like he's just telling us that everything in life is pointless, that there's no reason to worry about anything, but there's no reason to care about anything, that everything is going to end. And so what's the point of your life? Well, if there's no point to my life, why am I even trying to be a decent person? I mean, that's the logical conclusion, right? If this is all pointless and there's no reason to care about anything, then why should I be a good person? Why should I be a decent human being? But he tells us it's not about not caring about life. It's about understanding that it is temporary and you don't know how temporary it is. And there is a way of living life that's worthwhile, that actually gives it value. In the last verse, in verse 10, he writes, to remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body. So he's painting here this image of aging. And there's so many people that get frustrated with growing old. How many of you guys feel like you've grown old? There's several of you raising your hands, and some of you that probably should have. Here's the thing. It can be really easy to fall into this entrapment of being frustrated with growing old, right? Or being resentful even of it, right? You have people who try to hide their age, right? We dye our hair. Women do their makeup differently. We dress differently. We do all kinds of things to hide the fact that we're getting old. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here to condemn people. If you're dyeing your hair, doing your makeup, that's not what I'm condemning. I'm just saying that we oftentimes fall into the entrapment of going through a lot of effort to hide our age because we're resentful of it on some level. We don't want to get older. You know, when I was younger, I was always taught that that age was deserving of respect, not because of what you've accomplished, but because you've survived long enough to accomplish it. Right? My wife points out that I've now started getting gray hair every once in a while. And she's like, you got to pluck that. You got a gray hair coming out. You got to pluck that. Why? Like, this is awesome. Like, I never thought I'd live long enough to get one of these. There is a beauty in growing older. There is a blessing in growing older. And if you're still here, that means that there's work for you to do here. God didn't leave you behind because he forgot about you. Right? God hasn't not called you home because he just doesn't care enough about you coming home. He did, after all, send his son to die so that you could, didn't he? So that means if you're still here, then he has a reason for you to be here. And there's something beautiful and something encouraging in that. It just isn't something to hide. It's something to flaunt. I'm older than you says, maybe I know something. It says, maybe I'm worth listening to. But if you don't approach that growing older with a sense of humility and under this guise of wisdom that Ecclesiastes is trying to show us, then your purpose has failed. Because nobody wants to listen to a fool. And there is a lot of old fools in the world. So what's the calling here? Ecclesiastes, these two chapters put together, what have they called us to do? What have they called us to live a life after wisdom in order to fulfill our purpose of living a life of wisdom, right? Because wisdom comes from God. So how do we do that? He's told us that work is pointless and vain. He's told us that building legacies is pointless and vain. He's told us that seeking pleasures in life is pointless and vain. He's told us that having many children is pointless and vain. He's told us that, well, what are we supposed to be looking for here? Well, it's pretty easy, actually. Right? Chapter 12, he concludes the whole thing. He says, fear God. That's the point. It's the takeaway. It's the one thing that gives us value. It's the one thing that makes life worth living. It's the one thing that guides us. When we come to the conclusion that the author has, that all of this stuff is pointless because it's all temporary, then the only thing left is the intemporary, the permanent. And the only thing that is permanent is God and His will. So that becomes the only thing that matters. That's not the same as not finding joy in what you've been blessed with. That's why repeatedly throughout this book, the author has reminded us to take joy in life, to take pleasures in the simple day-to-day. But there is a difference between finding pleasure in the day-to-day and making the pleasure your purpose. There is a lot of people that have fallen sway to that. I find this enjoyable, and so I pursue that with everything I have. I find having money enjoyable, and so I'm going to pursue money. I find children enjoyable, and so my whole life is centered around having as many kids as I can. And not to say that having kids is horrible or wrong. I certainly enjoy mine, but I will point out that we have young people who think that they can build a home before they own a house because they've lived in the shadows of adults that have made children their entire purpose in life. So if I don't have children, then I have no purpose. And so what are they doing? They're pursuing that thing that they think is supposed to give them purpose. Except they're not ready for that. See, every one of our decisions, every one of our emphasis has an impact on the people around us. So what's your emphasis? What's your purpose? What is the thing that people know about your life? Do you find joy in the day-to-day? If so, good. You absolutely should. You have no business as a child, as a redeemed child of God, living life in this constant state of feeling terrible, in this constant state of despair. Either God is beautiful and the world is beautiful, or the world is ugly and its creator must also be ugly because he did not create it outside of a reflection of himself. The people in your lives, do they see you making God and his commands your primary and sole purpose in life? The wonderful thing about it is, when we make something a priority for ourselves, we find joy in exceeding or excelling in those priorities. What does that mean for us? That means the more of a priority obeying God is to you, the more joy you're going to find in obeying God. If you think it's miserable trying to follow all the commandments God has given you, then I would challenge that you need to fix your priorities. Because if your priorities are God's commands, you're going to find joy every time you find yourself succeeding. And that's a joy we can rely on. Why? Because we know God's will is reliable. We know his commands are reliable and just and permanent. And that is the difference between finding something enjoyable and finding joy. That is the difference between temporary moments of happiness and a permanent sense of joy in our lives. Is it based on the fleeting and temporary? If so, don't be surprised when it goes away too. Or is it based on the permanent, the fixed? And Ecclesiastes' point is we ourselves are temporary and fleeting. So if we find joy in ourselves, our joy is still going to be temporary and fleeting. That's one of the reasons we struggle with growing old. Because we found joy in ourselves. And so when ourselves starts to fail, we don't find joy in it anymore. So I urge you, each of you, as we close down our study in Ecclesiastes, and hopefully that you've taken some things out of these lessons, but if nothing else, the practical application of this entire book, right? Fearing God and keeping His commands is not about putting you under thumb. It's not about putting you in your place. It's not about limiting your life so that you can be better than everyone else. It's just simply trying to show you everything in life is temporary and fleeting except for God. If you want your joy to be permanent, place it in the things that are permanent. If you want your hope to be permanent, put it in the thing that never ends. Right? It would be tantamount to me entrusting my life savings to a 20-year-old man. And saying, I'll take good care of your money. He's saying, okay, here's everything I've saved in my life. Go take care of it. And then being surprised when he turns up and he has none. Well, he's a 20-year-old man. Why would he know what to do with it? At 20 years old, I never had $1 to my name because as soon as I got one, it was spent. And I was usually spending $2 for every one I earned. Why do we put our money in the banks? Because the banks are permanent. Right? We know they're going to be there tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And Lord knows if they're not, then the government's going to come in and we're going to still get our money back. We want a surety. Our joy should be so important to us that we seek the same security and surety for it. And there is only one way to invest our joy in something and have it never have to go away. Find pleasure and joy in every stage of life. There's a reason it exists. If joy was only meant for the children, we'd never become adults. There'd be no reason for it. If you're like Gilbert, apparently he does have one stage, because I'm pretty sure that man's never going to be an adult. Kids for life, right, Gilbert? Look, my point in all of this is, just because the book seems depressing at times, right, doesn't mean it's meant to be. The message he's trying to give us is one of hope. The message he's trying to give us is we need to understand everything in life is vain and temporary so that we can start looking at what's permanent. Fix your eyes on the things above. Today we want to make an offer to any of you who have struggled with any of these things. If you find yourself in a place where your focus and priority has been temporary and you find yourself suffering because of that state of mind, we want to encourage you to seek reconciliation for that. Fix it, right? We know it's a problem. Let's fix it. And let's fix it together. No family member watches a family member suffer in silence. And we don't want to see you suffer. And if you are, then we want you to let us know so that we can be there for you. We deserve that opportunity. It's not about you. Even confessing before a congregation, it's not about you. It's about us. It's about us having the opportunity to be there for you. For us to have the opportunity to be Christ-like for you. And you owe us that opportunity. And so this morning, if you have any needs at all, prayers, reconciliation, if you'd like to make confession, or if you'd like to experience the waters of baptism and join Jesus Christ in his death, burial, and resurrection for the hope of eternity, to finally place your joy, to be able to place your joy in that which is permanent. Whatever your needs are this morning, we ask that you bring them forward and make them known so we can help you see them met. As we stand and sing.